Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the statistics say if you get less than 6 hours per night, it's like you got 0.
Yeah.
And I was averaging anywhere between 3 and 5 on a good night.
That
So it
was
was
me
basically
for like the last 6 years. Yeah.
So I was basically getting 0 sleep. And it was, you talk about rash decisions, poor decisions, harmful decisions to myself and others. Absolutely. I was really spiraling down.
Hurting the ones you love.
Absolutely, we always do. When we're hurting ourselves, when we are hurting, we hurt other people as well.
Right.
Only hurting people hurt. And it was turning into a mess. And I was just becoming less and less functional at work, less and less effective in my personal life. I felt as a parent, everything was sort of spiraling down, which causes anxiety, depression, and now the problem is growing exponentially in other directions. All of that core of that lack of sleep. So,
how much of depression do you think is lack of sleep? For men, I would say it's also testosterone.
I think there's a lot of things. Excellent question, first, Eric. I'm glad you brought that up because depression, in some form, is so prevalent across society.
Yeah, it is.
And it was my biggest thing, honestly, lack of sleep and flat out depression. And I had to get up and go to a job I did not enjoy. To my friends who are listening to this, who I worked with, I love you, but they also know that how much I hated my job.
Yeah,
and
that's the thing that kept me at my job that I worked for 7 years was the people I worked with.
Exactly.
Loved them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I had no relief at night. My days were stressful just because I didn't enjoy being there. So it spiraled me down, down, down. To the point my depression was so epic. I'd have a couple of good weeks and then I'd call it going into a funk, but it was really a deeply depressed state. The funk was me minimizing, or not realizing my brain wasn't fully functioning, right?
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I think that it is prevalent for a lot of reasons, and lack of sleep is one of them. It's a big one. Testosterone, absolutely. We know that as you get older, hormones are really the governor of the body.
For women as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Women more so than men, in my opinion. We only have one thing we have to fuck with,
Primarily one,
yeah. And women have
like 37,000. I don't know. I feel I empathize with women.
No, yeah,
Truly.
I do too.
Yeah.
For
So,
many reasons.
Testosterone is one aspect, but I think more than both of those. Depression, I believe, is also, we had a big conversation in version 1.0 of this talk about diagnosis in the psychiatric industry.
Yeah, hit on it, go ahead.
And so I feel, based on my experience firsthand in the psychiatric industry for myself and my family, and being a lifelong psychology nerd and loving all this and being immersed in this ideology that psychiatry is the only branch of medicine that diagnoses based on behavior. And the example I gave earlier was if you went to an oncologist and your regular doctor says, I think you might have cancer, go see an oncologist. And you went in and they asked you about your symptoms and they had you fill out a questionnaire. And they said, I think you have...
We treated somebody for this 3 weeks ago. It sounds like the same.
Same thing, yeah. And studies show that with these symptoms, it's probably maybe pancreatic cancer. So we're going to start you on a regimen. And your first question would be, where's the science test, right?
Yeah,
where's the blood test? Where's all these other tests? Where's the biopsy? Things like that. But psychiatry gets away with it based on behaviors, symptoms, and interviews. That's how they find out about these things. It's the only branch of medicine that generally does not look at the organ that it treats. And also with your cardiologist, if you went in because your heart was fluttering once in a while, and they listened to your symptoms and then didn't do even an EKG or the basic things and prescribed a treatment regimen, you would, again, have questions, and rightly so. So with psychiatry, there's this psychiatry that's changing ever so slowly because medicine, most things change ever so slowly when there's a big industry, right? And medicine's one of them. And Dr. Daniel Amen, who runs the Amen clinics, and I've been to those clinics, they're amazing with the work they do there, so I will plug them all day long, even though I have no association with them directly. But he was the first one who really started bringing in brain scanning into diagnosis. And they also do a history, they also do behavioral. Behavioral matters, but it's not the only thing. So they look at all three of those pieces. And I always tell people, if you're going to get a diagnosis, if you think you have an issue, if someone tells you, hey, you go to a psychologist and say, I think you're bipolar, don't accept that diagnosis. You need to go to some place like an Amen clinic, and there's other places that do it now. But he was the pioneer, that's why I always want to give him credit. And to the point, like 20 years ago, he was on Quack Watch and things like that.
Yeah.
Like you're a nut, we don't need to do that. We have 1 million questionnaires, and he has the data. He's actually a scientist who's...
How many people actually fill out those questionnaires that tell the truth as well?
That's a certainly valid thing, but even if they do, how many symptoms are comorbid? Okay, so you can't sleep, Derek. That's about 19 different psychiatric conditions right there. Right, I'm making these numbers up, but it's significant. So
no. I would say 19's on the lower end.
Exactly, yeah. So any symptom you come up with can be any one of a number of conditions. So what they try to do is get enough symptoms and narrow it down into this ballpark. But even then it's a ballpark. And then they're ballparking medications. So this is one of my rants I like to go on, my soapbox things is always make sure you get a diagnosis. If you're going to get a diagnosis and go on a treatment regimen and get medication, and there are people who benefit from that, make sure you get one that includes a brain scan, in my opinion, or some sort of brain imaging. So back to depression. So you go and you fill out this questionnaire. They say, okay, you low energy, lack of motivation, you don't sleep, you have vague aches and pains, all the common symptoms of depression. Yet you are undiagnosed with depression, and put you on any one of the 75 depression medications. But studies have shown that depression, honestly, is more often really just a habit of negative thinking. If you think negative every day, because everything we do is habit. And that's one of the main things that as we get into hypnotherapy, is changing habits. And so much what we do is thought habit as well. It's not just our physical habits. It all starts in the brain, so it's thought habit. So if you grow up, especially if you grow up in a negative household or difficult circumstances, and you develop this negative thought pattern, and all your thoughts, and 90% of your thoughts every day are negative about how things are against you, and things are difficult, and things are a challenge, and I'm putting it myself again, that's where I was at, that's where I got into this depression. Things feel heavy and overwhelming. Of course you're going to be depressed. Being depressed, even chronically long-term, can be very different than clinical depression. And that's an important distinction. Yeah. And that's where something like hypnotherapy, do I say it can cure depression? If you have clinical depression, no, there's a regimen for that. But if you're depressed, and it's because of habitual thought patterns, that's where something like hypnotherapy can go in and clean up that thinking.
Yeah. You know, I'd be curious to see how hypnotherapy works for certain, I wouldn't say disorders, but like, okay, let's take autism.
Okay.
For instance, right? So, have you ever, or have you heard of anyone ever trying hypnotherapy for an autistic kid?
I have.
Really?
I've done it. And my mentor has actually referenced working with clients, we say clients, that had different spectrum type disorders. And actually it can, so here's the thing, we're not going to change because autism is more of, getting back to something else we talked about in version 1.0, the computer model, hardware, software. Your actual physical brain is the hardware. And all your life experiences and all these stories and beliefs that actually create what we call this personality. Our personality or who we are. You're really attached to this idea of this is just who I am. Now, who you are is a series of experiences that have turned into programming.
Right, but how does that work with autism?
So with autism, they're going back to the hardware. So most of us, we have pretty similar hardware. We're individuals.
Their wires are backwards.
Their wires, I would say backwards, but they're wired a little bit different.
Different,
right?
Yeah.
And then their programming fits differently, right? On top of the wiring is different. So it's still, with hypnotherapy, we can still affect the programming. And I've seen the results, and it actually helps people think differently. And again, we're not talking about, obviously, if we're talking the bell curve of the autism spectrum, that's a huge gap, right? There's a huge bell curve, a wide swath. And there's people that may not benefit from it. But I've seen people, especially, we're talking like higher functioning Asperger's and things like that. And in ADD, has technically been put on the spectrum. I think they've kind of put everything on the spectrum at this point. And like they put ADD on there and such. But there's people who benefit. We change that programming. All we have to do is fit it into what the existing hardware is.
Yeah.
Now, and are they going to get the same results as person A who's on the spectrum in some form didn't get the same results as person B who's not? No, but we could take any random person A and person B and they're not going to get the same result. So what I like to say is that I don't believe that hypnotherapy can resolve everything for everybody, but I believe it can fix almost anything that somebody's working with, if that makes sense.
Hey, if you have liked and subscribed, go ahead and look down below in the description. You can find links to all of our platforms and follow, like, subscribe on those as well, please. And go ahead, when you subscribe to our page here on YouTube, let us know what you think, write your comments, and click that little bell so you get links to new posts every day and every week that we put them up. Thank you. Well, that does it for Whiskey Tango Talks. I'm your host, Derek Pizzatoro. I appreciate you joining us. Tune in next time for amazing life stories and adventures. Y'all have a good night.